Hello and welcome to another one of our DMU live streams. Today, obviously, we're talking about computer science. We've got a few different things that are going on, but we're very happy for you all to be joining us. If you are joining us on Facebook, make sure you're saying hello. And if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them throughout. We will have a question and answer bit at the end to make sure that you've all got all of your questions answered that you're needing. But yeah, also, if you're on YouTube, let us know that you're there. We're wanting to know exactly who you all are, and make sure you're all very welcome in today's live stream. It's obviously a little bit grey outside, so this is something to get you a little bit distracted and make sure you're feeling a bit more comfortable about applying for DMU and the computer science course that you're hopefully coming to in September. But today we are going to have a little bit of a test lecture by one of our academics, Luke Attwood. So he's a senior lecturer at computer science at DMU, and he'll be talking about why computer science is so exciting, and exactly what areas you'll be getting involved in within the course, and how the course covers topical issues such as AI, surveillance and ethics and things like that. So you'll be learning a bit more about what the Computer Science BSc course is like, as well as software engineering. So Luke has been joined with us today. How are you today, Luke?
Yes, hi there, Lenny, and hello to anybody watching us live or indeed watching this back afterwards. Yeah, as Lenny said, I am the program leader of BSc Computer Science at Montfort University. And you may also have noticed in the footer a minute ago that it was also showing BSc Software Engineering. So these two courses are actually part of the same underlying program. They have a common first year. Some of you may have already come to an open day and been made aware of that particular point. But in essence, everything I'm discussing today is focused primarily on computer science and more generally the computer science discipline, but it will also be relevant to the software engineering course as well.
That's great. So we will also be having a student join us. So Zain is a current student who will be able to give you any sort of answers to any questions you have about student experience and what it's like studying on the course, not just from the course perspective of teaching it. So Zain is here with us today.
Hi guys.
How are you, Zain?
Here we are. How are we today?
Good, thanks. How are you doing, Zain?
Oh, can't complain.
Good. So you're a second year student, and what course was it exactly you were doing again?
Yeah, I am a second year student studying cybersecurity at DMU.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So we've got any questions, as we said, just leave them in the comments on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you are, and we'll be able to answer them throughout this live stream. If there are any questions that we're not too sure on, then we'll make sure to give you the right directions of where you can go. And obviously, if you are wanting any information about where the course and what's going to be happening with the course because of coronavirus and everything, then you can just head to our website, which is dmu.ac.uk/coronavirus. And all of the information that you'll be needing is just on there. So the link is just below us if you want to copy that over. But I think we've got a little bit of a lecture coming now, haven't we, with you, Luke?
Yes, that's correct. So hopefully not too much of a formal lecture, more something that's kind of exciting and interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly eye-opening about some of the interesting areas that you may get involved in if you study computer science. Especially with us at De Montfort University. One point I'd also like just to add at this point as well is that, of course, you may have noticed that Zain is studying cybersecurity. However, we do actually share a very similar first year with cybersecurity. So I think there's two modules that are different, but most of the other modules are currently similar. So Zain should be well set to answer any of the questions you may have. With regards to some of the first year content anyway, later on.
Perfect.
Anyway, I'm happy now to start my presentation then, and I can be talking for a little while. I've got a few slides, mainly just to kind of have something in the background, something a bit more sort of hopefully visually stimulating. So I'm going to effectively go through 5 different themes. So the idea is to not go on for too long. I don't want to give you a 50-minute lecture, but I kind of thought that coming up with 5 different themes that may seem somewhat isolated from each other at first, but hopefully all linked together come the end of the presentation, And this will actually allow me to kind of look at some of the maybe slightly more non-obvious areas of the computer science discipline. And I'll also hopefully be able to link that back to some of the key subjects that we cover on both computer science and software engineering at DMU. So the first image you can see here, you clearly will recognize this as a car, but I wonder if you can recognize it more specifically and some of the technology that surrounds it. So some of you may have actually seen these on our roads in the UK. It's one of Google's driverless cars. And of course, driverless cars are becoming more and more prevalent within society now, and will only increase, I believe, to do so exponentially in the coming years. And as you may be aware, the kind of brains behind these driverless cars very much falls in the area of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is something that is mentioned a lot in recent times. It's worked on by researchers and software developers. However, actually the reason for showing this image is to kind of consider some of the more slightly more non-obvious areas and other kind of stakeholders that would be impacted by this project. So the first thing to say is, you may notice at the top of the image, although it's slightly cropped, there is actually a camera on the top of this car. So this is actually one of Google's Street View cars. And of course, that therefore links to areas of surveillance and privacy. We have a module later on the course that focuses on privacy and ethical issues and data protection matters and so on. And of course, the technology behind this is also itself very sophisticated. We then have other kind of potential socio-economic impacts. So for example, people may end up losing their jobs as a result of the introduction of driverless cars. People that are taxi drivers or lorry drivers may find they lose their jobs as a result of this. You then have potential legal impacts as well. For example, if two cars have a collision, who would be responsible for paying the insurance bill? It's an interesting train of thought. So for example, it may be the two individuals in the car that would be responsible and their associated insurance firms. Or of course, it could end up being the car manufacturer or even the software vendors that have produced the sort of technology that actually runs and controls the cars. You then even have, for example, political issues that could arise, because you could consider in certain areas the movement of people could even be controlled. So if an entire country only had driverless cars in the future, then certain governments could choose to actually disallow people from moving from one area to another. So I guess the point is here is that initially when you think of a driverless car, you probably think of the fantastic achievement in actually producing this in terms of the software. And as I say, almost in layman's terms, the brains behind this. However, of course, a development team needs to consider all these other factors, all these different stakeholders. And what we strive to do on our courses at the Montfort is to inform our students of all these important matters that hopefully are interesting and eye-opening, but also we're working towards producing IT professionals. So not just someone that can hack some code together, but someone that's a professional within their industry. And that's something I'll allude back to in a second when I go on to the next slide. So you can hopefully see the next image now. As I say, there's not particularly a link between these, but they are all different areas that are interesting for consideration. So you can probably recognize this as a piece of equipment you may see within a hospital, maybe used within our NHS, for example. It's a scanning device. And therefore, obviously, it helps assist and save people's lives. Of course, at first, you could consider the importance of the hardware and the software that's used in order to run this system. And in fact, you could actually call it a safety critical system, because it's actually used in order to help save people's lives. And also, if there was a malfunction with this system, it could actually have an impact on somebody's life. So you may be interested to know that we have many different research groups across the university, and more specifically within the School of Computer Science and Informatics, we have several specialist research groups that focus on different areas. And indeed, these research groups actually inform our curriculum. So when you're studying a course with us, then the material we'll be teaching you will, to an extent, be informed by the cutting edge innovations and areas of research that these specialists are looking into. One particular research group of interest is referred to as the STRL, which is an abbreviation for the Software Technology Research Laboratory. And these do actually indeed focus on safety critical and dependable systems. And this, of course, leads you to think potentially more generally, how would you write a specification for a safety critical system? How would you go about testing a safety critical system? Clearly, you need to be more rigorous in that process than if you were just developing a system for your own personal use. Aside to this, I guess as well, you could consider another point. You could say, how could we make a system trustworthy? You may wonder why I've emphasized that particular word, trustworthy. It so happens there's an initiative called the Trustworthy Software Foundation that is backed by the government and also major players in the computing industry. And this particular initiative is about setting different levels of trustworthiness. So if I was developing a safety critical system, then I would obviously have a very high level of trustworthiness that was required. And we embed this into our curriculum on some of the software development modules that we teach. And more generally, you may or may not be aware that our courses are accredited by the British Computer Society, which is also known as the Chartered Institute for IT. So by studying these courses with us, you have the benefit of potentially receiving that accreditation afterwards. And therefore, you can actually put those professional qualifications on your CV, which should further attract you to potential employers in the future. So we can now go on to the third image. And you can see here, this is, of course, some CCTV cameras. And you're probably aware that we have a large number of these in our country. So what kind of concerns does this raise then? Obviously, we have, again, related to, for example, surveillance. And then we also have areas surrounding privacy and ethics as well, which, as I've already mentioned, are areas that we cover on the course. This also made me think when I was producing these slides a day or two ago, that a more recent topic of conversation and something that's been in the news an awful lot is the ongoing development of contact tracing applications around the world, obviously to help deal with the very unfortunate global pandemic that we're facing. So when developing software for such a system, what kind of architecture would a developer need to deploy? You may have heard terms in the news such as, a system being centralized or decentralized in terms of how it works. And I guess more generally, when developing a mobile application, for example, you could consider, do I just want my database to be on a remote server? Would it be beneficial to also have a local database stored on the handset itself, allowing, for example, offline usage and benefits in that regard? So these are the kind of design decisions that obviously development teams need to make. And of course, these are the kind of things that we will discuss with you on the course. We're not just looking at how you write code and how you produce computer programs. We're doing much of that as well, but we're also considering the bigger picture and some of these very important design considerations as well. So I'll now go on to my fourth theme, as we say, and my next slide. And this is something a bit more hands-on and practical. So clearly you can see this as a computer program. And I guess it's worth me pointing out at this point, because it's a common question that the applicants do have. There is no prerequisite for you to have done programming before coming to the course. However, of course, it's preferable that you at least have a general interest in the area. Hopefully, whilst I'm talking, you're having a look at this code and you may be wondering what it does. If any of you have written any code before, I wonder, do you recognize any of the constructs inside of the program? Possibly even, do you have an idea of what programming language the code could be written in? And I guess one other question I could pose is, more generally, do you have any idea as to what the program does? So I'm just going to see for anyone that's watching live if there is actually any kind of answers to any of those questions about recognizing what the program potentially does or recognizing the code inside of it. So I don't know if Lernie, you just want to come back in and just see if there's actually anything that's come up in the live stream.
So there's not actually been any comments of what people think the language is or anything like that. Maybe it's a little bit too difficult. Someone's said C++. Social on YouTube says C++. Is that what language it is?
Yeah, no, that is indeed that's indeed a programming language, and I'm not surprised by that answer. This code, if someone has written code before in C++, then this code does not look awfully dissimilar to that. It so happens that this is written in a different language, but what you'll tend to find is that a lot of the skills you learn in one language are transferable to another language, both in terms of the actual mechanics behind them, but also the actual code itself can look very similar. So there's lots of common languages like C, C++, Java, C#.
I've done a little bit of JavaScript before myself, and I thought it might have been something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So so that's one of the nice things about writing code, that you can actually transfer these skills from one language to another. Anyway, so let's go to the following slide, and to show anybody interested in this is actually what the program does. So it's not awful exciting, but what it does is it prints out an ASCII rectangle. So you can clearly see there's 4 rows and there's 10 columns. If I just flick briefly back to the previous slide again, you will actually see that those dimensions were actually stated at the top of the program. And then you have the 2 different while constructs. These are actually known as loops, and so these are repeating the respective blocks of code that sit within them, and that's one of the common or classic ways of actually drawing ASCII shapes. So this code could be modified to actually draw a triangle, for example, fairly easily. So anyway, just carrying on, just the final point I wanted to make is this is now another computer program. So I've got alternatively, and you may notice a slight similarity between it. But we've got the height and the width there at the top, but of course the code itself looks very different. Now, at this stage, again, I'll just pose a question. Does anybody have an idea what this program may do?
I don't know that there's anyone think. There's no guesses at the moment as to what people think it is.
Okay, so the very interesting point about here, and it's a bit of a trick question really, is what this program does, and I can show you by going back to the previous slide, is it does this. So the program actually produces the exact same output. And what we're actually seeing here is therefore 2 very different looking computer programs actually producing the same result. And indeed, it so happens that this program here is also written in the same programming language. So there's a few points I'd like to elaborate on. So I guess at this point, Lenny, I can just continue with the rest of the presentation. So thanks for that input there. Right. So to continue on with the presentation then at this point, a few points I'd just like to say before we move on to the final theme is that this programming language, as I think I may have mentioned, is called Scala. So the language is shorthand for scalability, and it's a language that runs on the Java virtual machine, and we teach it in year 1. And one of the really nice points of this language is it's known as a hybrid language. And that means that you can actually teach different approaches to writing code. Another way of thinking of that is you can actually look at different computer programming paradigms. So for example, the first program we looked at was very much using an imperative approach. And the second program we're now looking at is using a functional approach. So this actually aligns much more closely with the functional programming paradigm. And normally, to teach these different approaches, you would actually have to use different languages. But with Scala, we can use the same language to teach multiple different computer programming paradigms and the underlying constructs and principles that they allow us to teach students. So I think educationally, that's a very powerful tool. A couple of other points I'd just like to make is that many modern languages have started to include functional constructs. And one of the reasons for that is because it's been identified that functional programming is particularly powerful at producing solutions for multi-core platforms. And of course, almost all hardware these days has multiple processing cores. One other point to make is that by being exposed to these different paradigms, it will actually help you much more easily to adapt in the workplace. So no matter which language a hypothetical software development company may be using that you end up working for, let's say on placement, you'll be able to more easily adapt to that, having been exposed to these different kinds of ways of writing code. So hopefully that's an interesting point and links back to some of the things that we do in the first year and again continuing into the second year as well. So to finish off then, I'd just like to briefly go through a few points about the general structure of the course. So a few kind of, I could talk about this for 50 minutes easily, but I'll just try and keep it to a couple of minutes. So just a couple of kind of key points, I guess I'd like to highlight. All the modules in year 1 and year 2 are mandatory. So you don't actually have any choice as things stand. And many of the areas that I've discussed today, such as software design and development, testing, mathematical theory, ethics, and law, are covered on these mandatory modules. We also have other areas of key focus. For example, we have a module that looks at concurrent and parallel algorithms, which is very useful when working on multi-core platforms. And then we have a module, for example, that looks at agile development teams. So this actually looks at simulating workplace environments and actually setting you up for doing that in the future. What happens then is you have an option to go on placement after the second year. And this is something that we strongly recommend. And also we have a dedicated team to support students in obtaining placements throughout the year as well. Once you come back from placement, or if you indeed just decide to go straight into the final year, this is when you do an individual development project. And beyond that, you largely then choose from an exciting array of options that we have. So in the final year, this is when you get to specialize based upon the particular areas of the discipline that you maybe want to focus on more in your career. So for example, we have options currently as things stand, although these of course are being evolved during as each year goes by. We have options on areas such as big data, artificial intelligence, front-end web development, and multi-service networks, just to name a few. So hopefully that kind of gives you a nice feel as just kind of the outline structure of the course and what would happen between as you transition between the different years. And I think that's kind of got to the end of my mini little presentation. Hopefully that was of interest to you. And I guess I'll now just pass back over to Lernie to handle any questions that come through for myself and Zain.
Yes, so we'll have a little bit of a Q&A now because there's been quite a few questions in the comments and we had a few sent in beforehand from students about what the different courses were like and specific things about that and what sort of things you should be doing to prepare. One thing that we should just mention at first is there have been a few comments about whether lectures will be taught online and things for the first term. We're not completely sure of how that will go just yet, but if you do want some more information about the first term, we've got our webpage dmu.ac.uk/coronavirus, which you can see just in the lower third there, which is giving all of the updates. So whenever we have updates as to what's happening, then they'll all be put in there. So that's the best place to be checking and finding out exactly what's going on. But we can head over to some of the questions and use some of Zain and Luke's knowledge of the course and things to help you guys out with some of the things that you may have been wondering over the past few weeks to make sure you're getting prepared for everything that's coming up. Obviously, this link down here is good if you have any questions that maybe we haven't answered and you need some more information. All the information about computer science is on that section of our DMU website. But if we head over to some of the questions we've been receiving in the comments today, I think the first question that we had, maybe one for both of you to be fair, someone asked what programming languages are recommended to be learning before you start the course. So obviously Zain and Luke, you may have a few different ones that you'd recommend for the different courses.
Yeah, Luke.
Do you want me to start off with that, Zain?
Yeah.
Yeah, so from my perspective, when applicants ask me what languages should I learn before starting the course, the sort of formal answer to that, as I think I briefly alluded to during the presentation, is that there's not an actual kind of prerequisite that you've done programming before coming onto the course. So we do kind of teach our first year programming modules from scratch, although we go at a reasonably quick pace, but we don't go on the assumption of that prior knowledge. But certainly, if there was a choice of having students study programming a little bit over the summer before coming and studying with us or not, then I would choose the former. So any kind of language really will do. It's not so much important about which programming language you choose to look at, but it's more just kind of getting an understanding for what computer programming is really. It's kind of quite different to most other things you may have done before, especially if you've not actually written any code. So I think any kind of common language, it could be those we've discussed today, like C or C++ or Java or Scala. As you can see, though, there's not any particular language that we would have wanted you to have a look at. So I'll pass over to Zain. I don't know if you actually did any programming before you came onto your cybersecurity course.
No, I agree completely with you, Luke. At DMU, they taught us everything. Coming in, I didn't have the largest amount of programming knowledge. I hadn't really touched on it. But first year, we had 2 modules on C, and that was enough to take us through it, and that was perfect.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. I think that also answers a little bit of the question that someone had of what languages you'd be learning on the course. So obviously you said things like C and C++. Are those the main languages, or are there other ones as well?
No. So yeah, to clarify at this point, so on cybersecurity, they actually do the C programming language in the first year, and actually on I believe, although I don't teach on these courses, I believe on the games programming courses they do C++ in the first year. On computer science and software engineering, we use the language called Scala, which is the one I was referring to during the talk, and indeed that code you saw during the talk was from the Scala language. So that's a language that runs on the Java virtual machine, which is cross-platform compatible, so you can run the code or run your programs on Linux, Windows, or Mac, which is useful. But more generally, just to elaborate on the other languages that we use as things stand. So in going into the second year, we then teach Java on a couple of the key software development modules, and Java is still statistically the most highly used language in the world. So that's something that's very useful to put on your CV. And we also teach C# as part of the Agile Team Development module, and C# one of sort of Microsoft's languages that's again very heavily used in industry. And then another language of note that we teach is PHP, and that's the language we currently use for server-side web development that will be taught in the second year as well. So hopefully by the time you get to the end of your second year, you will have actually covered a wide variety of different languages that you can put on your CV, and that certainly helps when you're applying for placements potentially.
That's great. So we've also had another question from someone who was asking, they were going to be doing Computer BSc as a degree. Are there many similarities between that and computer sciences and the things that you've been talking about today then?
So yeah, I have to start this with a sort of caveat that I don't obviously run the BSc computing course, and I don't have a huge amount of knowledge of it. There will certainly be some general similarities between the courses in that they will both teach a wide variety of different areas, and they will both teach practical skills. So obviously both courses will teach we'll have programming modules. They'll have modules on how to design systems and so on. Sometimes you could say the computing course is slightly more aligned to the sort of areas of design, designing systems, and maybe the kind of the business requirements behind the systems. Whereas you could argue that computer science and software engineering possibly gets a bit more into the sort of nitty gritty of writing code and the mathematical theory behind doing or designing systems as well. So there's possibly a little bit more programming and a little bit more maths on the courses that I look after in comparison to BSc computing.
Yeah. And we've also had a question that came through a little bit before the live stream, which was asking about resources that you need when you're on the course. So they've been saying they're doing a computing BSc, and they wanted to know, obviously you may not know the exact resources they may need for this, but they're asking about which resources they'd need and where they'd be able to get them from. So even if you guys don't know exactly which resources they'd need, have you got any tips of where they can find the resources that would be good for them?
Yeah, so again, I can start off on this and then I'll hand it over to Zain as well to give a bit of input from sort of a student's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So normally speaking, we don't normally require students to purchase laptops or software. We obviously have our computer laboratories and all of the work can be completed on campus. Of course, there's a big sort of caveat to this right now because as you alluded to earlier, we don't yet fully know as to how classes will be delivered for the upcoming academic year starting in September. So obviously some of the material may be delivered online remotely, some of the material may be delivered on campus. There may be a blended approach. So of course we can't release any sort of specific information about this at this time. However, if you take aside the sort of hardware, so look more generally at other resources you may require, increasingly we're moving away from the need for students to not force students to have to purchase textbooks, for example. So a lot of the reading resources that we provide are available digitally through the library, through different licenses that they have. Of course, we still will recommend textbooks to those of you that actually like to have a hard copy of a book, as you know, people like myself, I still like to have that as well. But there won't be sort of an enforcement of that. So we do generally try and, we say, keep the costs of studying as low as possible purely from the sort of academic course side of things. Yeah, that's what I'd say on it. I think, is there anything you'd like to add on to that, Zain?
I think just with the software bit, now looking at it for my course specifically and the coursework I've done, all the software I've needed, I've been provided with by DMU free of charge. It's been available to us on an educational basis because we need it for our work, and therefore there has been no need to purchase anything at all. So it has been very, very useful. The labs, they're open to you a lot of the time, and you can spend, all the software you need is all already on there. So getting into a lab is a lot easier, but of course, we'll have to see what time says for us on that one.
Yeah, can I just come back in on that? So that's a very good point, Zain. Essentially we very much strive to use open source software in terms of the and applications for the modules that we teach. So there's therefore not the requirement to sort of purchase licenses, and therefore, as Zain said correctly, the software is freely accessible for students to store on their own machines at home, for example, if they'd like to. And the other point is where the labs are open as normal, what's sometimes not recognized initially is that they're not just used for us to teach you. You can also use those surrounding your classes as well, just like you can access the library. So it's actually a space that you can use to do your work. Obviously, as I say, with the sort of caveat at the minute that we're not entirely sure what the setup will be in the coming months, but hopefully in a bit sort of longer term, then everything would go back to the usual setup.
Yeah, that's perfect. Someone else was also asking, and we're almost running out of time a little bit, so we won't be able to go through all the questions. But someone was asking, in terms of careers for the future, with a degree in computer forensics and science and those kinds of areas, what are the career paths looking like for those kinds of students?
Okay, so obviously one of the courses mentioned is computer forensics and the other computer science. But I mean, generally speaking, I mean, clearly forensics / security is a slight more specialist area, and therefore the jobs would more naturally be linked in that area. So I mean, I guess I can only assume that Zain has got a particular keen interest in cybersecurity, and so by studying that degree, he will be slightly better set for actually picking up a role within that industry. However, saying that, one of the benefits of actually studying computer science is because it's a little bit more generic, and as I said, I think right at the beginning of my presentation, it's often considered as almost an umbrella term for the computing discipline, is you're not kind of throwing all your eggs in one basket at the point of choosing your degree, and it does leave your options open. So, we do cover a reasonable amount of security on our course, and it's of course possible when you get into your final year to specialize in all sorts of different areas. As I mentioned earlier, you've got areas of web development. Maybe you're interested more in like the ethical side of the subject, or the sort of law / political side. So there's a huge diversity of different roles that you could find yourself in. And the other thing I always say as well is it's not just will I be writing code to develop a mobile application? Will I be creating a website? It's also the kind of company or the kind of industry you may find yourself in, because obviously in this presentation we've looked at driverless cars, we've looked at CCTV cameras, we've looked at equipment that's used in hospitals. So you may have a particular area. Let's say you're interested in in the automotive industry, with vehicles and transport. You can guarantee there's going to be a huge amount of jobs that will allow you to utilize your skills within the computer science area across that different sector. So really, you're not limited by choice. Of course, it doesn't mean to say it's going to be a walk in the park to obtain these roles, but if you have particular ambitions to work in a given industry or sector, then you will have the opportunity to at least strive towards that, which I think is an exciting prospect.
Yeah, that's great. Have you got anything to add on that, Zain, about different career paths and things? Or
No, I think Luke covered that quite well, actually. It's just cybersecurity, forensics, they go hand in hand, but they are a very specialized niche. So commonly what you see is those who are studying it have an idea already about what kind of path they want to go down. With computer science, like Luke said, it's an umbrella term. There's a lot of paths you can go down that are quite endless, to be honest. The options are available everywhere.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we'll have one final question. If you haven't had your questions answered at all, then you can email us and we'll be able to help you out there. Or visit the website we showed before, which was dmu.ac.uk/computer science. If you want the email address, then it's chem@dmu.ac.uk, and we should be able to help you out with any questions that you have about the various different computer courses. But the final question for today, I think, will be, with a BSc Computer Science degree, would it be recognised in other countries as well? And the student was looking more specifically for countries like Canada, Dubai, and Scandinavian countries. And they also wondered whether computer science as a degree was more valued than a computing degree. I don't know if you guys would know that at all.
Okay, so I'll tackle the second part first. Obviously, I'm slightly biased because I teach computer science. I would naturally say it's better than a computing degree, but it sort of swings and roundabouts, really. They're both courses that are highly recognized, and I imagine you will be able to be successful having taken both degrees. So I guess it depends on which you'd like to specialize in more. And I think for any of the, we do offer lots of different computing courses at De Montfort University beyond just computer science and software engineering. So of course we do encourage students to study each of those to make sure that they're taking a sort of informed decision on which course they choose to study. With regards to the first question, I don't see any reason why the degree would not be well recognized and well received in the other countries that were mentioned. I think that here in the UK we've got a very good reputation for higher education. In fact, De Montfort University, more specifically, shall I say, computer science at De Montfort University, is actually ranked reasonably highly in world ranking tables. I don't have the specific numbers to hand, but I know we're something along the lines, we're in the top 25 or 30 UK universities in certain global world ranking indexes. For example, there's one called the Global Shanghai Index that we perform very strongly in. So I think therefore that because of that, if you did study a computer science degree with us, then that would come with the related prestige. We do have some very exciting research that we undertake at the university that also is recognized globally as well.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. So we just want to sort of thank everyone for joining us on the live stream today. Obviously, we have got a variety of other live streams coming up. And if there are any specific ones that you're wanting, then let us know and we can try and put those on so that you're all getting all the questions that you have at the moment answered. Obviously, we have got our digital open day that's coming up on the 4th of July. So if you had any questions about specific courses that you weren't able to get answered today, that maybe Luke and Zain don't have much knowledge in, then you can go and book on a place on the web link just below and book on a place at our digital open day where we'll have current students, current lecturers, everyone's going to be virtual campus tours. So it's basically being on campus, just you can do it in your pajamas. If anything, I think it's almost better than a real open day, but hopefully you will be able to get everything that you're needing from that. But obviously, if you do have any burning questions that you're needing, then do head over to the website, which was dmu.ac.uk/computer science. And you should be able to find all the information you're needing on there. And if not, our email addresses to contact us to get those questions answered. But hopefully this has helped today and you've enjoyed being able to get a little bit of an input from our current student and lecturer.